So if you talk to the local folks around here, they will tell you that there are two large and vicious predators that are starting to make a return to this part of the country. For those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Morgan Gold, and I'm a farmer here in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. I raise ducks, geese, chickens, cattle, pigs, trees, bees, and I'm trying to document and share the story of what's happening on our farm with all of you guys. And yes, lately I've been hearing from a lot of local folks that there are two new predators that are making a comeback, and they're telling me that I need to be careful and watch out, and that my farm is at risk. And I don't know, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but let's talk about it. Good morning, chickens. How's everybody doing? I'll be moving you guys to a fresh paddock later tonight. But first, let's get you some food and water. So when it comes to the types of predators that we typically have around our farm right now, the most predominant one is probably the coyote. We'll also have the occasional bobcat, and our farm is kind of on the southern reaches of the range of the Canada lynx. And while yes, things like bears and fishers and weasels and raccoons are all also very common around here, we don't often have a lot of other larger predators like you see out west, like wolves or cougars or that sort of thing. But that's not to say that we didn't used to have those things. And while some of you might not know this, we actually used to have very healthy cougar and wolf populations right in this area. Like if you go back, say 500 years or so, before white settlement happened up here, those two animals were actually the predominant major predators. I don't know why I actually thought that that was gonna work. I was just trying to avoid soaking myself. If you actually look at the University of Vermont, right, their sports teams are actually known as the Catamounts.
Go Catamounts!
And catamount were actually what cougars used to be called in this area. Now I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that it translates into mountain cat in French. But there actually hasn't been a recorded sighting of a catamount in Vermont since like the 1930s. Huh? Well, according to VermontHistory.org, the last known catamount in Vermont was killed in 1881, and it's actually on display in the Vermont History Museum in Montpelier. And by the way, I'm actually wrong about the translation of catamount. I think it's just like a portmanteau of cat and mountain from Old English. Don't believe what you hear on the internet, everybody. But yes, the catamount or eastern cougar has been officially declared extinct. And while there are many people who say that the catamount is still back, I would actually say that the animals people are seeing are not necessarily catamounts. Because the eastern cougar's cousin, the western cougar, actually is starting to migrate further and further east. In fact, it's been something that's been very regularly and frequently documented, that eastern migration. And so while there are many people who will say that they're seeing catamounts come back or that they still exist here in Vermont, if anybody's seeing anything, what they're probably seeing is a western cougar that's moved this far over. But yes, there have been actually several reports over the last 20 years or so here in New England of confirmed sightings of the cougar. Whether it be Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, or even here in Vermont, there have been sightings. And some folks might try to tell you that, oh no, those are people who are mistaking the bobcat, which I can 100% confirm is here, and I've seen with my own two eyes, both with trail cameras as well as in person, about as far away as Macho Man is from me right now. Macho Man's our breeding bull, who you see right over there. But I think if you look at a side-by-side picture of a cougar and a bobcat, they look very, very different. Cougars are significantly larger, and the bobcat's tail is about 6 inches long, while a fully mature cougar can have a 3-foot long tail. And so yes, I do believe that we have had cougars in this region of the country starting to return and migrate, looking for habitat that they can go to in order to support themselves. But I think the second more significant question might be, am I concerned about these cougars coming to this area? And the answer is not really, because while there have been sporadic sightings, there are absolutely zero reports or evidence of breeding happening in this area. So those sporadic sightings that folks are seeing are more the result of animals just kind of migrating and straying from their traditional habitat versus actually trying to set up shop here. Because if you look at the habitat and ecosystem that exists here in New England, what you're gonna find is while there are pockets of area that are really good and like appropriate habitat for something like a cougar, there are also a lot of elements that are not conducive to supporting that size of a predator. I mean, in fact, if you look at most of the eastern United States, that is the truth. The fact of the matter is, the larger the predator that you have is, the larger the game animals you need to have to support those populations. And while moose used to be very abundant in this area, their numbers have actually been significantly struggling in the last few decades decades, and as climate change continues to take effect, you're probably going to see the moose further and further range north and stop being this far south. And even back in the day, there used to be reports of caribou coming this far south, but that probably hasn't happened in hundreds of years either. Mega predators need megafauna to support themselves. And the only real megafauna that we have in regular numbers around here are farm animals and beasts like my Scottish Highland cattle herd, which I know some of you might say might be the epitome of overconfidence and hubris for me to make a declaration like that. I am not concerned. But the reality is, even the numbers of beef and dairy cattle that are kept out on pasture here in New England, based on the way that they're kept, as well as their numbers, as well as the vigilance of the farmer, I just don't see a population taking hold in a way where they start to truly return to the wild in this space. Oh wow, would you guys look at that? One of the reasons why I think this is one of the most beautiful places on earth to live is each morning when you start to see the fog recede and you start to see the mountaintops reappear in the clouds. It's just gosh darn beautiful out here. And yeah, I mean, it's not far. I mean, I could hike that distance in about 3 or 4 hours. It's very close. But I digress, because I mean, the point that I really wanted to make is that if you look at throughout the history of humanity, anywhere where humans go, typically the large megafauna populations will shrink pretty regularly. I mean, the two most recent examples in human history that we have are when humans came to the Americas. I don't know how far back that was, but they were going over the Bering Strait essentially. Or when humans ended up in Oceania or Australia, that area. Because the pattern always seems to be, you know, humans show up at a place, they hunt the game animals, whether they be mastodons or, I don't know, oryxes or whatever you want to call them. Those game animals die off, and then very quickly those predators also die off. I mean, isn't the dire wolf like a perfect example of that happening in recent human history?
To me, Ghost. Bring it here.
Abby, to me. Oh, look at you, my little dire wolf. Yes. So for those of you guys who are not familiar with the non-Game of Thrones story of the dire wolf, allow me to enlighten you. So the dire wolf was this major predator here in North America that lasted for a pretty significant amount of time, but they died off about 9,500 years ago, and dire wolves were big. I mean, like the biggest modern gray wolf that we have here in North America now was about the size of the smallest adult dire wolves back in the day. They were just this big mega predator, and they preyed on the megafauna that lived here in North America, like the mastodon or the bison, or maybe the sloths that we used to have here in North America, or even the camels that we used to have in North America. I know you guys are not going to believe me and you're going to go try to fact check this, but trust me, there were camels in North America. I swear by it. But as the climate changed and as humans started to show up, a lot of that megafauna died off. And when that megafauna died off, it became very hard to support a large predator like the dire wolf, and that's when animals like the coyote and the fox and the gray wolves and the red wolves started to pop up and become more prominent, because they were smaller predators who were built for the context of what was happening within the continent. You know, one thing you should always be keeping in mind when you're thinking about ecosystems, and I often talk about managing our farm like an ecosystem. Well, one characteristic of an ecosystem is that it is always constantly changing and evolving, and so keep that in mind. It's not a static thing. Ecosystems will shift. And as the ecosystem shifted on the dire wolf, both climate-wise, as well as available fauna, as well as even the arrival of humans, they ended up going extinct and making way for the smaller predators. Hey, Kels! Come on, Kels! Fresh grass, come on! Hey, Kels! Come on, Kels! Fresh grass, come on! Hey, Kels! Come on, Kels! Fresh grass, come on! Let's go, my megafauna. Come and get your feed. You're gonna love it. Some really good grass here today. How you doing, Annie? I get a pet? Aw, thank you. Time to make hay there, Annabelle. Come on, macho stud. You get some good grass. I know, Amanda, you're usually the last adult to get through. I've always noticed that calves end up going into like a mischief phase. Like they always seem to start off in the first month or two as fragile and delicate. Then they kind of chill out and they're just sort of mellow. And then I don't know what it is, but whenever they hit, I don't know, about the 3-month mark or so, they turn into mischief. And then they're always just wandering around, ignoring the fence lines and just doing whatever the heck they want. Baby B has officially entered that era. But anyway, back to the point of this video. When I think about what happened to the dire wolf, it's actually very similar to what happened to the wolf and the coyote here in New England. You see, when white settlers ended up coming here to northern New England, the apex predator at the time was the gray wolf. But as colonial towns and settlements started to spring up in this area, like for example, our area here in Peacham, Vermont was settled like in the 1750s to by 1776-ish, the town was set up, and then by 1800 there were like things going on here, and this was like a settlement essentially. Those wolves were an extreme detriment to the agricultural practices, particularly the sheep rearing that was happening in this area. By the time 1900 rolled around, the gray wolf was almost entirely gone and wiped out. And now that's not to say that gray wolves haven't popped up here and there. For example, there was a sighting in Bangor, Maine once, actually not too far from us over in Glover, Vermont. There was a documented case in the 90s of somebody killing a gray wolf. But again, much like the cougars that I was describing earlier in this video, they haven't really set up shop here. And the reason that they haven't set up shop here is because in that 100-year span between, say, 1900 and the year 2000, you had this gap in the ecosystem of a predator for fauna like moose and deer and the rodents and so on and so forth. And that's when the coyote, which is really much more of a Western American animal who had been migrating east, came here to Vermont and set up shop, and now they are extremely common. Like if I check my trail cameras, I regularly will see coyotes almost as much as I'll see white-tailed deer or turkey. They are everywhere, and they have really taken over the niche as the top canine predator in this area. But as I said in the beginning of this video, more and more folks are starting to say that wolves are returning here to Vermont and really becoming a true predator force. And if you look at the coyotes, they do seem to be getting bigger and bigger. And if you actually look at the DNA of a lot of the coyotes in this area, what you're going to start to see is that DNA isn't just coyote DNA. It's a combination of domestic dog DNA, because we have domestic dogs nearly everywhere around here. Like, for example, even Abby dog here, even though she's fixed, if she wasn't fixed, I could see her maybe getting pregnant with some coyotes. They would be very weird dogs, but physiologically speaking, it could happen. But the coyotes are also starting to show signs of wolf DNA, meaning that they are intermixing with, say, the red wolf down south or the gray wolves out west. And so essentially a new species of coyote has formed and evolved that's suited for this climate here, and really suited for this kind of mix of wilderness or semi-wilderness like we have in this area, where we do have large contiguous tracts of forest as well as lots of pasture, but then also be suited for more urban settings or suburban settings like most of the eastern states that you have here in the United States. And even though they might have a little bit of that wolf DNA, they are still significantly smaller than the traditional wolves that were here, because the game populations are smaller and the animal populations that would support a major predator like that are smaller. And so everybody kind of adapts and evolves together, which is again a major part of how you think about ecosystems. It's not just one change that happens and then there's no other impacts. If you change one thing, it's going to probably have at least 24 impacts to all the other things in that ecosystem. And so how it all works together is an important part of wildlife and habitat management. And so yes, while there are reports of larger coyotes and even potential wolves coming back to this area, and yes, there are reports of western cougars migrating east and showing up in areas like where our farm is at, I'm not significantly concerned about them as it relates to my farm animals, because I know, number one, we've got our own predator controls in place that are actually not all that different than predator controls that are used out west. And then number two, I don't think we're the type of habitat that can truly support large populations of those types of predators, and I don't see them taking the coyote away from its newly claimed position. You guys look, it just hayed that field. So for folks who are critical of the idea that you can't have agriculture mix with solar power, I think you stand corrected. Come on, Abby, let's go. Release the clucking! All right, Abs, you're gonna be a good girl. I'll be back with you in a little bit. I think another note that a lot of folks make whenever I talk about coyotes is the fact that they are an invasive species, which is 100% true. I think there is this distinction though, and recognition that we have to make when we think about our ecosystems, particularly here in northern New England, around invasive species, because arguably cattle and chickens and ducks and geese, Well, actually, it's not ducks and geese, but definitely chickens and cattle and pigs. None of those animals are native to this area. They've been domesticated and brought here. And so we have to think about how those animals play a role in the ecosystem. And then when you have niches that are open, you got to think about how other animals play in that ecosystem. Aw, I love you too, buddy. And so keep that in mind as you think about the role of the coyote. And yes, it has assumed the place of a more traditional species here, but if you look at the last 50 years, they have become the predator of record, and so, I don't know, maybe we have to sort of make do. And by the way, these comments on invasive species are no different when it comes to plants, so please keep that in mind as well. By the way, just a quick reminder, you should check out my new book, Toby Dog of Goldshaw Farm. There's a lot of discussion in that book talking about the different animals, both wild and domesticated, and how they interact with each other. Or you should watch this video up here, which talks a lot about this same topic in more depth. So I will see you over in that next video, and thank you for buying the book.